This is another episode of The Aftermath. And Teresa, just give a little bit of background on her. And we also have some topics for her to talk about: mediation trauma, parental alienation syndrome, co parenting. And we had a couple special topics too, because we haven't talked about them, but we want to know more. So, COVID and grandparents as well, and their role in all of this. So, Kindra, how are you today? And Teresa, I hear you have moved to the Arctic. Is that right? That's what I'm.
Well, you
Or,
guys, I'm in Philly and it's
okay.
chilly.
Yeah, Philly. Yeah,
I like
well,
that.
What to say?
we're warm. We have a lot of warm weather in the Southwest, so I'm just throwing in. I think you guys in the Arctic. So how you guys doing today?
Good.
Wonderful. The sun's shining, so
I hope
not as
so.
depressing.
That's a good day.
That's right.
Teresa, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little bit about your background as we to the topics that we want to discuss?
Sure. So my background is in psychotherapy. I've been a psychotherapist for almost 20 years, counseling and coaching people to up level in any area of their life. I also am an author of a book. I wrote my first book, and it's about overcoming trauma and living a drama-free life. And it's based on my own story of overcoming trauma, as well as a conglomeration of stories of counseling clients over the years and how they have overcome some of the traumatic things in their life. And I put together a curriculum called the Grid System. And for the past 10 years, I've been working in the court family law area as a preferred counselor for my area for helping with co-parenting issues, parental alienation, custody, and helping parents to be parents together, even if they're not together. And I can explain a little bit more of that. So for the last couple of years with COVID, it's been a little topsy-turvy, but now things are coming back into full view and still doing that. So thanks.
Well,
Sure. I
welcome,
want
Teresa.
Yep. I just wonder if we could just follow up a little bit on that. And also was my situation was in Pennsylvania, and I was saying to Kinder just before, you're at Immaculata, which was right across 352 of where I live. So I mean, it's really close to home. Could you say a little bit about a preferred type of person? I'm not quite sure I understand that, and maybe then elaborate, and then whatever Kinder wanted to ask, please.
So in the world of counseling, sometimes we have what's called a preferred provider. And that means that that's someone who has shown an exemplary track rate. And with the courts, there's many who are doing what I do. And I've been able to carve out a niche and become one of the preferred providers that the courts use here in my neck of the woods.
Wonderful. Thank you for defining that, Teresa, and welcome to the show. Can you talk a little bit about, since you're a preferred provider of the courts, my story has been like mixed, very integrated within the court system, right? And I think sometimes we think that everybody in court is, quote, in bed together, right? Everybody kind of has an alliance together, things like that. Can you maybe tell us some of the intricacies of how you're working with the court system and how you stay that neutral party and that you don't feel that you have an alliance to the judge or one of the attorneys on one side or the other?
That is a really good question. It's a great question, one I'm happy to answer. So, you know, one of the reasons that I'm sought out typically is because the courts know, the attorneys know that my passion is for the children in these situations. I want to make sure that they're getting the best of both parents. I also want to make sure that they're being cared for and provided for. And so when I get asked to do a specific case, that's one of the reasons is because I've gotten the name of somebody who's very passionate about making sure that children are where they need to be and being cared for the way they need to care for. Now, with that, and of course, there are always, it's so funny because I may be working with an attorney who's not liking the way I'm doing this, right? And then the next case I get, it's the same exact attorney, but I'm his preferred provider.
Mm,
So that's why I make sure I stay neutral because one attorney may be arguing with me on a stand in court. And then maybe the next month, he is he is helping his client who he feels I'm best suited for. So it's it's very important for me to stay neutral and to make sure the children are first.
Great answer. Love that. Mick and I love to hear that. The children are first. That's what we're about. So, can you explain a little bit when somebody is coming to court and you're mediating? How do you or can you prevent parental alienation?
That's a really good question because that is something that's coming onto the scene a little bit more frequently. And years ago, that wasn't even an issue. It wasn't even a case. It wasn't even a term. And now we're seeing that more and more. And sometimes what I'm called to do is to is to flush out if one parent or the other is alienating the children from, say, parent A or parent B. And then, secondly, it becomes my job next if I'm called upon and given the case and asked to take on the case. My job is to what we call reunite said child with said parent that's been alienated.
Mhm.
So it's a newer thing and it's becoming a little bit more, I don't want to say popular, but it's becoming a little bit more on the front line here of custody.
And it's really hard to determine that, right? Because it's not physical abuse that you can actually see where a parent is beating a child, right? It is an emotional, psychological abuse. And so it takes a special person to figure that out, and as you called, flush it out, right? Try to figure that out and what's going on in their heads and what's real fear of a parent and what is something that's been manipulated and, you know, twisted and turned so that the child thinks he fears or he or she fears that parent.
Yeah. That can happen a lot of the times and every case is different. That's why it takes time to navigate these cases. It isn't something where you can just say, "Hey, you know, see Teresa once or twice and then all your problems are solved." Some cases I've had with parental alienation become lifelong clients for me as they navigate through and things crop up. And so it's something you have to be really careful of. And not every case of parental alienation is a case of parental alienation.
Very true. Very true. And when you say lifelong clients, is that through the court system or do they become an individual client to help them cope with that as a parent that might be targeted?
So that is not through the court unless the court continues to, after the case has been either closed or modified. A lot of times a client will call me later and just say, "Hey, you were a custody therapist or a co-parent facilitator. I'd like to come in and we're having some trouble." Sometimes the court will ask the attorneys to put me onto the court order
Sure.
as support and as person that the parent A or parent B will call if there's an issue.
Sure. Okay.
Just
That
that.
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Mick, did you have anything? I can't tell if you're frozen or not.
I want to know about the actual process itself. So pick that person. So when I was writing Burning America, I said there's two that really happened. I had two different individuals, and it seemed like the first time I just went into it naively. I thought everybody was qualified. I had trust in the system. I didn't after a while, but who picks them? In other words, is the attorney? Does the judge? I mean, what is that process like?
That is a fantastic question. All of the above, because I have put myself out there years ago. I was referred to by an attorney who thought that I would be a good addition to the custody case. And then it just kind of, there was a little bit of momentum. So, what happens typically is when there is a need for a co parent or a custody mediator, sometimes the judge will say, "Look, here's a list of who we use, you parent A, parent B." Sometimes the attorneys will have already discussed it. "Look, we know where this is going. Let's use this person." Or the attorneys will come in with their own list of people and the judge will pick. So it really depends on the case. There's no one size fits all. But for the most part, it's usually the attorneys who are throwing out some and requesting the judge to pick counselor A, counselor B, and then based on what the judge thinks the needs are and how the needs can be met, it will end up being that the judge will okay the person and he gets put in the order.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can we, sorry, Mick.
I was just gonna say, second time around, because I had 2. The second time around, the attorney gave me the impression her person and things were going to go well. Things didn't go well. So that's why I was curious. I wanted to follow up on that. And it was in Pennsylvania, so it really does hit close to home.
Yeah. So let's back up a step and maybe if it's not a parental alienation case, how do you come in as a mediator and help the court system and the parents learn how to co-parent together? What does that look like?
So what I do is I have a system. I just don't have parents and children come in. There are some cases where there are some counselors or mediators, if you will, who it'll just go on and on and on and on and on, months and months and months. For me personally, I have a system. I have what I call sessions or meetings. Excuse me. And I typically make it 8. All right. So every other 8 meetings. And then we reevaluate because sometimes things get worked out in those 8. It's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of just helping people understand. It's a matter of helping people navigate what they're going through, work on their feelings, work on their children's feelings. So my system consists of actual meetings every other week for 8 times. Now, with that said, after that, we can reevaluate. And if the clients want to keep going, that's the decision they make with me. They let their attorneys know. Other times it will be they'll go back to court. I try to get those in before they are called to go back to court because most of the times I'm getting referred these cases because they're going back to court and they want something worked on by the time they get back to court. The judge wants to see some kind of movement before they get back to court. And then when they go back to court, sometimes the parents will say, it was good. We still want to continue, or we feel like we've gotten what we needed, and then the judge will decide. Now, with that said, my system consists of homework, communication, parenting sessions, meeting with the children, and then giving them a certificate of completion because I think it's important that the judge sees that each parent did what they were asked, required, suggested to do. And we're going to get into that word asked, suggested, and required in a minute. But I feel like it's important for parents and children to know that there's a beginning and an end when they meet with Teresa, and then we reevaluate because there may be a part B, if that makes sense.
Yes. So what do you mean by ask, suggested, and required?
So this is what happens, and I really learned a big lesson during COVID because I've been doing these kinds of meetings, sessions, co-parenting, custody support for a very long time. And during COVID, what was happening was parent A would call me hysterical. Parent B hasn't brought my kids back. Why not? Because they're saying the child has COVID, or the school sent the child home to the parent that they are with this weekend, or this week, or yesterday, or tomorrow. And what I found was the courts were closed, modifications were being moved, support court hearings were being canceled, and the judges weren't even working because of COVID. Everything shut down. So the parents were left, in a sense, to fend for themselves, which wheeled down to the kids were being shuffled all around. What I've tried to help people understand is that a court order is not a court suggestion. Okay. It's a court order. And when my name is on a court order, I take it very seriously. That means that the court has entrusted me with you, your ex or your ex partner, and your kids. So I take it very seriously. So it's not a court suggestion. However, the question remains, can a judge enforce that? There's no law that states a parent needs co-parenting counseling. There's no law that states a parent needs parental alienation assessments. There's no law.
Mhm.
However, the judge has the authority to say, you're in contempt. The judge has the authority to say you didn't do what you were ordered to do in this court order. But there's a line between enforcing it and requiring. So I do my best to let people understand that this is a court order and we need to follow this through. And it will be better for you in the long run when you go back to court that you, parent A or parent B or both, have done what you were required to do with Teresa so that the judge can see that you put your concerted effort into helping your child be stabilized during the divorce.
Sure, that makes sense. And I think COVID was very interesting for me as well because I went through that, right? Well, they've been exposed or they've been around somebody that had COVID or whatnot. And so now they can't come over. And oh, yeah, our court system, luckily in Ohio, just said we're not hearing it anymore. You are to follow the court orders. We're not hearing, any more COVID excuses.
Good. I love to hear that. It's
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah. So now that we're past that, talk to us a little bit about, can somebody who has been alienating a parent be turned around and you can counsel them through and they become co-parents? Or is it almost unsolvable? And what do you see in those cases?
It's never unsolvable. There's always an answer to the question of who's alienating who.
Mhm.
And whenever there's a perceived alienation, there's always a remedy for that.
Mhm.
It's a matter of fleshing it out. So first we determine if there is alienation. So say that we've determined, like, yeah, there's alienation. Most of the times a parent's not going to say, yeah, I'm alienating you from your kids.
Right.
I don't want you to see your kids. So we have to be careful we don't throw that word around too much. What's happening is a parent is either doesn't want to spend the time making sure the child gets to the other parent, or maybe the kids are saying, I'm busy, I'm in soccer, I'm in football, I'm in cheerleading, I have friends, I'm dating, I drive now. I don't want to go to that parent's house. I don't want to be over there.
Mhm.
So what we have to do is first flush it out. And this is what I've seen a lot of times. A parent may not even realize that they're alienating another parent. They're
Mhm.
just busy. There's a lack of communications. That is the biggest key here is communication. No matter what case I have, number one across the board is communication. It is almost as if parent A is talking one language and parent B is talking another language and they don't understand. And the kids
Mhm.
are confused because they really don't understand.
Mhm.
A lot of times the attorneys aren't bridging that gap, and that's where the communication breaks down. I've seen several cases where parent A talked to my attorney. Parent B is like, I don't want to talk to your attorney. I want to talk to you. So we have to flush that out as well. So say, for instance, there is an alienation. What I have found is that sadly, it boils down to one parent slighting the other. And it almost comes down to, if I can't have you, neither can the kids.
Mhm.
Or I hate you so much that I'm going to make sure you suffer and I'm going to make sure you don't see your kids.
Mhm.
Now, that lends itself to geography. If somebody's living a couple of streets over, that's an easy fix. Okay, I can work with that and work on that. That's an easy fix. Also, it's helpful when a parent is being alienated is what we call parental reunification. My job is to reunite that child. And that is my joy because I found that the kids want to see parent B.
Mhm.
Come into my office, they tell me, I want to see my dad. I want to see my mom. You know, I don't know what's going on. And
Mhm.
age appropriate because some
Mhm.
it's now. And
Mhm.
that if they're not living a few streets over, say they live in the next city, the next state, the next
Mhm.
country,
Mhm.
what do you do? That is where I think there's a breakdown. We've got to do better with these leaving the state, leaving the country. It just now there's a difference of going from Philly to Jersey, right? You could be in Jersey from Philly, 20 minutes, 10 minutes. Not so easy when you're flying to Seattle, right?
Yeah.
Lots of times I have cases like it's a parent A wants their child to get on an airplane at 5 years old so that they can be over in, say Kansas or what have you. Who in their right mind's going to put a little kid on an airplane to go visit a parent that lives halfway across the country?
Great.
We have to do better with that. I don't know how that's going to play out. Every state is different. So
Hmm.
I've done Zoom.
Hmm.
I had a case where somebody was in Hawaii and somebody was in Philly. We've done Zoom. I mean, if it is my job to provide children with the best resources to have the best of both
Hmm.
parents as much as possible. But of course, there's always an impact.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I was waiting on Mick to chime in because I know this kind of relates to him if you run with the child.
Yeah, definitely. So, yes, I was in Pennsylvania. Wife ended up in California and then tried to get the child back. And then child was down the street, but it still didn't matter because mom would take off and I still couldn't see the child. So we had, to me, it was pretty obvious alienation. But again, this was years ago. I'm a little bit encouraged the fact that it's more recognized. We've heard this a couple times. So that's better because the events that I'm talking about were 98 through 2001. So hopefully there's a little bit more change. But I had a couple things I wanted to follow up on.
Sure.
The system that you had talked about, is that the subject of your book? And then the other thing was when you said about the court orders being enforced, that was extremely difficult for because I have a court order. I believe the judge should be the law and one person followed it, the other person would not. So my question would be if there's consistent not following of the rules based on the court order, would you recommend going to a trial or a custody trial if you get these flagrant violations and repeated violations?
That is a loaded question. And A, let me stipulate I'm not an attorney. I cannot speak to legal terms. I can only speak to my experience and what I've seen in some of these cases. I've seen cases where a parent was put in contempt and was sanctioned and monetary fines every single time. I've seen cases where a judge would say, you know what, if you're not gonna play nice with your ex, the child is going back to parent A or parent B, and you'll see the child on Wednesdays. I've had judges really sanction parents for messing with the custody orders.
And I applaud those judges because there's very few out
Amen.
there, and I applaud them for doing that.
Me too.
And I do too, because there's just no way to get around some of these court orders other than just going through the order and do what it says.
Mhm.
But I don't want to speak to go into a trial or, I can't speak to that. That is something that an attorney would have to flush out with the client. I want to be careful for anyone's on here listening who may be an attorney because I want to stay in my lane. As far as the courts putting somebody in contempt as well, I can tell you on the other side, I've had cases where a child will come in hysterical. I don't want to go. I'm scared to go there. I don't want to go to that parent's house. I get left alone, or parent A's new partner's mean, and So what do you do if an attorney or a judge does say, yeah, you're in contempt. And a kid's in there going, I don't want to go. And parents going, I tried. I put my child in the car and he threw up. I'm telling you, these are real cases. I've had cases on my front steps of my office. A child is running down the street away because it's his or her turn to go with parent A or parent B.
And I do
Yeah,
agree with that. I think that really does happen from
that's
experience that it but I think what needs to be determined is if the child is literally in fear of the parent that they have to go spend the time with, or they're in fear of the repercussions of if they like spending time with that parent and they go spend time with that parent and repercussions that the parent they have to go back with is going to what's gonna
and so those are the cases where I I recommend that the child or children have access to a therapist.
Mm.
I recommend that the child's have an assessment. I've been recommended by the courts to do an assessment on the child or the children to see basically who the heck's telling the truth here. Okay.
And I agree, but there has to be a third party independent person, not chosen by the parental alienate because they have custody at the time or whatnot. And so if they are choosing that person, they are also manipulating and talking to those therapists. I can speak from experience on that.
Right. And I would say you're absolutely right. I also have gotten calls from parents that have no attorney, have no case, have
Sure.
they just call me and say, look, you were recommended by so and so who was seeing me with their children during their custody. Can I have my child come in for an assessment? And I do the assessment. So to there are ways to help the children. I think we have to be careful that we don't get to a point where we so mistrust the whole process
Hmm.
and we feel like the attorneys are pitting us against the parents and the parents are pitting us against kids and the therapists are biased. Look, the fact of the matter is all of those things do happen
Hmm.
on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. My job is to make sure that a child is being provided for, cared for, and has the best of both parents. A child deserves to have both parents as
Hmm.
often as possible. And listen, sometimes I have to say to a child, you know what? Parent A is fantastic. Parent B is fantastic. They both love you. You need to go. This is
Hmm.
what it says. The judge wants you to go. I think you can safely go to that parent's house. Sometimes you have a child who is just, in a sense, manipulating both parents.
Nope.
Hey, yeah. And so there's a flip side to every case here. I
Yeah.
hope you hear my heart here. It's not that cut and dry, but I've been doing this long enough to know what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. And to answer your question, Mick, my book is a proprietary tool. I don't have clients come in. I sit with my book and we go through page after page. It's the curriculum that helps you to overcome the trauma, change your mindset, change your
Mhm.
perspective, change your approach.
Mm.
Because 9 times out of 10, those are the three things that are snagging people with co-parenting your kids. And I'll tell you why. The three things are their mindset. Maybe they've downloaded ideas about parenting and from watching what they went through as a child. Um, so we've got also their perspective. My perspective is that my family is better than your family, and you're a bad parent, and I'm better, and they should be with me. So sometimes the perspective is off, and then the approach. A lot of times I have to work with people with approach. Like it does not help to blow up your ex's phone with rabid, and I say rabid because it's like a pet who has rabies. It's just a and then you just completely chew your ants through text. That approach is not helpful. So those are the things that I try to help when I'm called upon in a case. And there are times that I have to do it virtual. Like I said, there's a parent in this state and a parent over here, and it's not that simple for a parent to get on a Zoom or to get to an office. So there's lots of different ways that we can work it. I hope that answers your question.
Does mine, yes.
Yeah, I had something similar with your book, so I'm glad you clarified that. Teresa, we need more of you in every state. That is for sure. We just need to duplicate you. When you talk about the reunification counseling, what does that look like when you're reunifying a child with the parent? Do you include the other parent? Do you make them get along first and come to an agreement first? And then, I mean, what does that look like?
So for me, and I'm speaking for how I flush out these cases because it's not a one size fits all.
Sure.
What my system consists of is I meet with parent A for maybe 1 or 2 sessions, parent B for 1 or 2 sessions, and then I bring the kids in because I want to find out, is this
Sure.
child Is this child able to be reunited with their parent? Is this child wanting to be reunited with their parent? I have to find out what the kids are feeling and thinking.
Mhm.
We haven't even started reunification yet. I'm still getting to know all the players. And again, we're doing the reunification. And again, it's 8 sessions every other week. That gives people time to go home and do their homework. That gives people time to see if they're doing what I'm suggesting in each meeting. And yes, the child has to be reunited with the parent, which is why I'm glad that I'm called upon because I really wouldn't like to see this kid. I always have these visions of a child with a suitcase, hysterical, crying, going to parent A or B's house after they haven't seen this parent in years or a year or a month or 5 months, age appropriate.
Mhm.
So my system consists of meeting with parent A, parent B, and then the child or children. And then we determine, is reunification needed? Is it warranted? Is it doable?
Mhm.
But if it's in a court order, it's doable and I make it happen. And I've had such great responses with reunification because I can't think of how many cases I could tell you so many that, a parent will come in and the parent's been made out to be such a horrible person. I meet the parent and I'm like, this parent has been trying to see this child for months and months and months, sent cards, sent money, tried to FaceTime, and they've all been circumvented
Mhm.
by an ex or a family member. So
Mhm.
I want to make sure that everybody is playing. Now, as far as the other parent being in the room, I don't think it's a good idea because the child is always looking at parent A and parent B. What do I say? What do I do? Then they look at me like, what do I do, Miss T?
Mhm.
And so I have to help people understand that your child is going to be okay. I'm not flinging your kid into a lion's cage. I've had cases where the judge and the attorneys duked it out in a sense, where parent A will be in with parent B and to
Yeah.
for reunification. I cannot get around that. And I just pray to God that parent B or parent A will be amenable to that.
Mhm.
And it actually works out better because your parent A, parent B, and in the same room, they're going to have to be mature. We're going
Right.
to have to let this child see that this child means a lot. And we're going
Right.
to do what we have to do for you, Johnny, for you, Mary.
But
That's
it's the children included. You're not counseling the parents on how to co-parent at that point. If there's
yep,
been alienation identified, you're not just counseling them together for sessions.
correct. What I'm doing, and that's such a good point because people will tend to say, hey, well, you're supposed to do this and you're supposed to do that. No, as a reunification mediator, counselor, coach, whatever you want to call it, my job is to provide the venue for alienated parent per the court to have a safe place and have a professional and
Mhm.
have the opportunity at the venue to be able to reunite with their child in a reasonable fashion.
That makes a lot of sense. I wish
That's
that
what
was yeah,
it's not therapy. This is
right.
what you have to understand. And I say this all the time. It's not therapy. Okay. This is why it gets really muddy
Yeah.
because people will say, well, you're the court ordered therapist. So no, while I have a background in trauma and while I have a background in stress management and mediation and social work and social services, it's yes. I am not therapizing. That's my word. Because co-parenting is not a diagnosable, treatable
Mm.
APA, NAN, AMA. It is not a diagnose. So that's where sometimes I have to help people understand parental alienation. It is not a diagnosable, treatable mental health issue.
Mhm. Right.
It is not a therapeutic relationship. Now, should we find that parent A or parent B has some significant mental health issues, emotional health issues, I can recommend, or I can find out, are you seeing your therapist? Are you taking your medication? Um, that is up to the therapist
Mhm.
or the attorney. So does that make sense? I want to clear that out right quick.
Yes, it does to me. How about you, Mick?
Yes, indeed, that does make sense, and seeing the difference in knowing what a therapist is and what a counselor does and knowing the proper distinctions helps a lot. And I did wanna move on to one other question if or comment area if we haven't touched on, because I know we were talking about grandparents as well, which we haven't talked about. I think this be a unique
Mhm.
area. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of grandparents in a process such as this?
Uh, One of my favorite topics as well. I'm a grandparent. Okay. I get it. I had grandparents. We all have grandparents because we all have parents. First of all, let me just tell you, scientifically speaking and psychologically speaking, grandparents can be the fabric of a child's life. Many, many children that I've counseled over the years and have seen in my office or on a Zoom call have specifically stated how their grandparents were an intricate part of their life. With parent A and parent B were fighting and custody this,
Sure.
custody that. Grandma or grandpa was always there. So I can't stress it enough. A child, studies prove that children develop more healthy emotionally, mentally, when they have a grandparent in their life. So let me stipulate that grandparents are extremely important in a child's life. What happened years ago was grandparents really had no role during custody, sadly. They were just there. And there has been some laws that have changed. In fact, all of the states have changed the laws regarding grandparents. Check with your local state. However, there are now some specific markers for grandparents to actually go to court and fight for custody of their grandchild,
Mhm.
fight for visitations. I've worked on those cases in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I've had more grandparent cases than I ever had before. A
Mhm.
grandparent took their own child to court because they want to see their grandchildren. So there have been cases where a parent A and a grandparent of parent A will go to court battling parent B to see their grandchildren.
Do you ever find that the grandparent could be detrimental if they've aligned with an alienating parent and eliminated a whole side of a family, including that grandparent? I mean, when we're talking about grandparents and how important they are, I think this is one thing that everybody needs to consider when you are divorcing. The extended family is so important to them. So I agree with you on that, Teresa. And I think they need to stay out of the emotion and the drama and be there for the kids. But have you ever seen it where a grandparent can be detrimental and where the good grandparent has been cut out of their life?
Absolutely. I see it all the time. Parents, grandparents for alienation cases, grandparents are definitely left out of the child's life. It's very detrimental. Here's why. Because when parent A and parent B was married or together and they had children, and
Mhm.
children went to grandmas or grandpas, right? Or had aunts and uncles, extended
Yep.
family, they're used to that.
Mhm.
You're just dragging a child away from that. You are ripping extended family members, which are cornerstone of child development is extended
Sure.
family and grandparents. So when you're ripping a kid away, you're doing a lot of damage to that child. Let's face it, kids miss extended family. They miss grandparents. Okay.
Especially when their birthdays, maybe all of them were together, right? I mean, everybody was together in their birthday. Everybody came to all their school functions, and then all of a sudden, mom and dad get divorced, and only one side's coming.
That happens all the time. So yeah, I can see that. It is detrimental.
How do the kids cope with that? How do you walk them through that?
So that is a great question. Let me, before I answer that real quick, say that there are times where children get used to just them not being around.
Sure,
So that is just a natural part of life.
sure.
And secondly, again, it's very listen, I've had cases where grandmother or grandfather is you know, struggling with addictions
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
or had the kid for the weekend and diapers weren't changed. I mean,
Yeah.
so grandparents, that's another story. Again, same with co-parenting and alienation and reunification. If parent A or parent B or grandparent A or grandparent B is struggling with addictions, if there's illegal activity, if they're incarcerated, if there's been abuse. I mean, those are
Mhm.
things that we can't get into now, but they are things that I have to consider. This is not pie in the sky and everybody leaves Teresa's office happy, happy, holding hands. That,
Sure. And everybody's concern, all of our concerns are for the safety of the children, right? To make
right,
sure they're safe. I think it's once it's deemed that it is safe, right? What happens?
exactly. Once we're deemed it's safe. And to answer your question, how do you help the kids cope? That takes time of working with the children. I'm what I do is help children by helping them with their emotions,
Mhm.
helping them with their feelings, and helping them to understand what's going on and grasp what it is they're being expected to do.
Mhm.
And sometimes I've had to sit with kids on a Zoom call or in the office by themselves and just say, this is where you're going to go tomorrow. It's going to be okay. I'm watching, you know, we've got this all worked out. You're going to be fine. So my job is really when it boils down to it, you're absolutely right. Your word cope. My job when you distill all this down, my passion, after we've got through all the fluff, all the chaos, all the trauma, all the drama,
Mhm.
my job is to eliminate the threat for any child
Sure.
or the situation they're going into or may be put into, and to reduce the anxiety and help them live a drama-free life. Because these kids, listen, they don't deserve the drama,
Right.
drama. They didn't ask to be born.
Right. And I'm sure that anxiety builds up over time, right? Because especially if you're in that alienating situation,
So,
grandparents' cards have been intercepted, presents have been intercepted, they've been blocked on their phones, they're not allowed to call them. That child probably thinks that my family doesn't love me. They quit, right? My grandparents don't love me. My aunt and uncles don't love me. What happened to my cousins? They don't love me. And then, once the reuniting helps or the reunification takes place, things are solved, right? Like you said, drama's over. Now the kids are seeing both parents. How do you you know, explain to them that their family didn't not love them, right? It was a process of keeping them apart and reuniting the grandparents that absolutely are heartbroken. I mean, I can't believe, I'm sure you can imagine as a grandparent, right? You would be heartbroken to be away from your grandkids and not be able to see them. When you go to show up, the cops are called. You know what I mean? It's just heartbreaking and the child to not understand that.
that's such a good point. I've had cases where I'm called and parent A is like, the police are at my door. Parent B just called the police on me. Crazy things happen. So here's how I'm going to just kind of wrap that topic up. And I'm absolutely happy to talk with people outside of here, my information here to help. Sometimes we have to understand that the child's fine. They're really fine. Maybe they're not old enough to understand what's going on. So we don't want to like throw stuff at them if they're not able to understand.
Yes.
And sometimes children are more resilient than we give them credit for, and they're okay. We have to understand that children develop differently and
Mhm.
they're age appropriate conversations that we have. And that's where I'm trained in child development, human behavior. So I'm able to help a child just based on their age, their environment. You know, Parents aren't therapists. They're not supposed to understand how to help their child at this age and that age. They're just doing their best to survive and get through this custody.
Mhm.
So I think it's really helpful to have somebody in your life that understands child development during these situations. Kids are resilient. They get over it. They get through it. But yes, they do suffer. They suffer terribly during this whole thing based on how the parents are handling it. And eventually, a child will grow up and turn around and go, you know what? Parent A was an idiot. Parent A was the one that kept me from parent B. Parent B did love me. Or parent A was doing everything possible to find me. It was parent B stops the process. So kids eventually know what's going on and they make their own decision. And that is one of the things that a lot of times a child will get called into court, into a judge's chambers. And Johnny, Mary, tell me what's going on. Who do you want to be with? Who do you like better? Who do you feel better with? And then a judge will make a decision. So a judge, no matter what I do, no matter what we've been through, the judge ultimately makes the decision. But I can tell you that working with me, I've been able to at least help the kids get through the rough parts and be able to process their feelings and even help parents to understand what their child has been suffering because of their decisions during this custody. I hope that makes sense.
I think that's a big point to point out too is helping the parents understand what the children have been going through and what they're suffering with psychologically. And then, like you said, sometimes they're fine. They'll be resilient and they lost a year or two and will come back with the family. But if they've lost 10 years, it might be a little different, right? But I think that's something important to point out too.
And and let me just, I know we're running out of time here. Let me quick speak to reunification. I've had parents who were incarcerated for 5 years get out of jail and want their child back or want custody, right? They'll get an attorney. I've had parents who were in the midst of addictions, in and out of treatment centers, get their life together, and they want their kid back. They want
Sure.
custody. They want
Sure.
visitation.
Sure.
I've had situations where parents pretty much walked out for years, and then all of a sudden, they want their child or children back. They want custody. They want visits. It is the right of every human being that has made a child to have that child in their life. It is the right of every child to have their parents in their life. It is legally, you are the parent. So a lot of times that help parents understand, like, look, legally, that parent is entitled to that child.
Mhm.
Legally, that child is entitled to that parent. How do we get there? And what are you showing your child if you're doing A, B, C, and D and making a mess for your kid? What are you teaching your child?
Mhm.
How are you teaching your child to parent later on in life when they become parent? How are you teaching your child to deal with confrontation? How are you helping your child to understand communication, deal with their feelings? Those are the things people have to understand long term. What are you showing your kids how to handle? I don't like that person, so we're
Yep.
just going to talk,
Yep.
right? You can't do that.
Right.
So the long term is what are you showing your children how to handle conflict resolution? Very important. It's all about conflict resolution. And then finally, you know, when your children grow up, I tell parents this many, many times. I don't want to have to see your kids here 10, 15 years from now in my office because of what they're suffering when this could have been avoided today in my office. Right. All fine. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Complete sense to grounded parents like Mick and myself. But, I find that very leading into your program that you're putting on and your meetup. And so
Yeah.
I just wanted to give a little plug to that because if you are having problems and learning how to deal with your ex, setting boundaries, maybe confrontation, avoidance, entitlement, alienation, you're putting on a program that will help parents do that. Can you speak to that for just a second?
Sure. And this stems from COVID because there were so many things happening with parents that I was just, offering Zoom meetings, just, let's, get on a Zoom meeting, let's talk. And I found that there were so many people suffering from the same feelings of this pandemic and what to do. And I saw some specific things that were happening. So I did a couple of webinars back then just to pinpoint on some topics that I saw were a pattern of across the board with co-parenting, custody, the pandemic. So I'm going to bring that back up now that things are starting to get back to some kind of normal. I'm getting some of the cases are actually being reopened for me to have these
Oh,
families back into my life. So I'm seeing that there are still some things that people are struggling with. So I'm offering this. It's 90 minutes. It's complimentary. It's on Zoom. We're going to talk about, how to manage, an uncooperative act and to how to help you with your perspective, your mindset, and your approach.
I think that's good because we can all work to make ourselves better, and that's all we can control.
Yes.
So that is January 11th from 6 to 7:30 Eastern Standard
Yeah.
Time.
Yeah,
So
that'll
they
be
can get a hold of you if they would like to participate.
sure. Yeah, they can actually just, message me and I can just send them the information. I do have a flyer. I don't know if you can put that anywhere, but yeah, I'd be happy to.
Great.
Show
I think we
notes we
can
can.
maybe put on the show notes. Yep,
Yeah.
Mick.
Yep. We'll get it.
Yep. Well, it has been absolutely wonderful speaking with you. We need more people like you in all states that are working to make the lives of the children better, and that's what the focus is.
And it's important because we're all born with preconceived ideas of what life is supposed to be. And my own story, which, I'm not gonna get into that now, but I had to change my life and I decided to further my education. And so I was just totally mesmerized by the world of psychology and why we do what we do. And in my research, I found that by the time you're 2 or 3 or 4 years old, 2 or 3 or 4, even I believe in the way you've downloaded a specific mindset or set of ideas or what I call mental DNA, downloaded them subconsciously. And it becomes the framework on how you view relationships, money, your career, how you manage, confrontation, conflict, how you manage your feelings, your emotions, your emotional intelligence. And so I found that people who were traumatized struggled with those things. And so that's what the book's about, by the way, the grid system. It's my story as well as thousands of people they've counseled and their story of how they've overcome, obstacles and beat the odds. So it's doable. But we have to change our mindset, our approach, and our perspective. So thanks. The grid system.
And where could someone get that? That would be a
That's
good
what
question.
yeah, just Amazon, you can put
Okay.
that I think I sent you that link too, it's on Amazon, you can listen to it if you have a Kindle, free on Kindle, Prime account. You can download the book on Amazon, people can reach out to me, I send them a signed copy, happen to do that. So, I would suggest that anybody who's struggling with the effects of past trauma, because 9 times out of 10, when I get called into come into these cases, we find out that parent A or parent B has significant trauma growing up and it played out in how they parented, how they were a partner. So I'll just leave it at that.
Wonderful.
Outstanding. Oh, thank you
Well,
so
thank
much, Teresa. We appreciate your time and your expertise and being an advocate for the children because we need everyone to be an advocate for the children. Thanks for being our guest today, Teresa.
thank you. It's been fantastic. I'm so happy. I wish you all a wonderful new year. And if I could be of any help, please let me know. Thanks for having me. You guys are amazing. I've been watching what you're doing. My goodness, you guys are ushering in a new way of looking at co-parenting.
Thank you so much. And
Thank
Kindra, the legislative advocate, we're all admirer of her. That's what she does such a great job. Thanks, Kindra. Thanks, Teresa. This is Mick, the Doctor of Digital, signing off. Until next time in the aftermath, day is full.